To unmute myself is one of the hardest things to do in this entire situation. I guess that it's part of the blueprint for my success in here, and I just had to backwards design this in order to figure out where I was going. So my apologies. And by the way, everybody, watch your bingo card because we're going to have some fun this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Lucas. I think you've single-handedly given everyone blackout with these.
Yes.
So awesome. All right, so I'm gonna read off your the session description that you're gonna do and a little bit about your bio here too. So Lucas is gonna talk to us about compliance with accreditation when regulation is in flux, relevant, and in this session, participants will discuss the current state of American accreditation to include information about the negotiated rulemaking from 2019. When and how will those new regulations be implemented? What is the status of regulations from the past? How can regulations from the past still haunt institutions in the present? And what should institutions do to ensure they keep abreast of regulatory requirements for their institutions? So Lucas, he has a lot of letters behind his name,
I'm
including
really special.
EDD, yes, a doctorate in education, an MBA, and CCEP. And so he's also the Vice President of Academic Engagement, formerly Compliance and Accreditation at Western Governors University, America's leading competency-based online nonprofit university with over 115,000 students and 135,000 graduates in each of America's states and territories. Lucas Cavill's team maintains trust through engagement between academic organization and external agencies, i.e. regional and programmatic accrediting bodies, state authorization bodies, professional licensing and certification agencies, all in American jurisdictions. A certified compliance and ethics professional, Lucas received his undergraduate degree from the University of Northwestern St. Paul, graduate degrees from Dallas Theological Seminary, and the University of North Texas, and an MBA from WGU. Thank you so much, Lucas, for joining us today.
Now I feel even more special now that I have that whole bio behind me and everybody's asleep. So I'm going to do my best to try to wake everybody up and talk about compliance because it's a lot of fun. So we are going to talk today about compliance with accreditation when regulation is in flux. And I never would have thought that being a nonprofit university would be a detriment in the field of compliance. But for those of you who watched the news in the last week, being a nonprofit university based outside of California with online students has pretty much thrown a monkey wrench into this entire situation. So we'll get into that. We'll get into some more pieces today, but really what we're going to do is attempt to follow along with this schedule. I'll give you some background information, a little bit about WGU for those of you who have no clue what Western Governors University is, and there are those, so don't feel badly. I'll tell you a little bit about me. I'll tell you my presumptions about you. We'll go into some mathematics lessons. Those are specifically for Maria because I know that she loves teaching mathematics, especially in an online environment. We'll talk about some of the current realities in American higher education, and then what you all have been waiting for, and basically the crux of the presentation, so what? What do we do about this? How are we going to comply? And then I will hopefully have time at the end for questions. But in order to have time for questions, I'm going to barrel through this presentation fairly quickly. So stay up with me as much as you can. We are all a little in over our heads. Little bingo piece there for you. Answer this question. By 2030, post-secondary education will or will not fill in the blank. Ready, set, go. Nobody's answering. They've all gone to bed. There we go. Be a big player anymore, not be passive. Now we're getting some answers. I love it. Be completely different. Excellent. Be purely online. That's an interesting one. So be smaller. That's a fantastic one. I have no clue where higher education is going to be by 2030, but I'll give you my opinion on it later today. And by the way, I should give you all the caveat. This entire presentation is filled with my opinions, and they're not worth all that much, but this is the kind of the way that I feel if my opinions are challenged, even though If I'm found to be wrong, I will be a little bit sad and realize that there is joy to be found in the future, and I will change my opinions to fall in line with yours. So I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen by 2030, but now that you all have given it the baseline, let's talk about compliance in today's society. So compliance today, thank you, Maria. Compliance today is a Sisyphean task filled with snail's-paced attempts to roll the ball up the hill. And by the way, those of you who were in the Coursetune camp last year where Tyson Heath was able to give his presentation, we in my department at the university use Sisyphus quite a bit within the context of what we do, because we believe that compliance is a Sisyphean task. There's a difference between being crazy, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, and being Sisyphean, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting to do the same thing over and over again. It's just that when it comes to the compliance aspect, pretty much you have to do it at a snail's pace in order to keep up with people that are basically going backward from you in backwards design. A little bit of bingo for you. So let's give some background information. First of all, about Western Governors University, because it's important. We are nonprofit, and again, that's been an issue in the state of California in the last week. We were founded in 1997 by U.S. governors, the governors of the Western states in the Western Governors Association, hence the name Western Governors University. We're big. We're in a lot of different states. We have 60 plus degrees specifically in 4 colleges within the realm of business, within teacher education, within IT and health professions. Health professions includes pre-licensure nursing. Yes, you can do online pre-licensure nursing. We've proved it because we are competency-based and all online, and we have an affordable flat rate tuition per term that allows students to progress as quickly as they can. Our student profile, and this changes on about every 6 months is when we'll update this. Right now, our average student age is 36. We've been 37. We've been a lot older than that, and our average student age is creeping downward, which is an important thing to note. I should go this way, downward, which is an important thing to note when thinking about who the students of the future are. But 71% of Western Governors University students are in one of the underserved populations, whether they are first generation, rural students, ethnic minorities, or a low income individual. Our student model, everything we do is built around the student being in the middle. And by the way, there's a difference between being student-centered and being student-obsessed and being student-centric. You can be so obsessed with the students that you're not able to see the forest through the trees. Yes, that's another bingo piece. One of the pieces with the student obsession is if you focus on one student in the realm of compliance, mind you, if you focus on one student, you may shoot yourself in the foot because you're trying to break over backward for one student and you lose a chip that you need to cash in later with an external entity. So it is important that you're not so student focused that you miss the rest of the university's ability to maintain its compliance. Now, you're hearing this from a compliance guy, don't forget that. And by the way, it does work. The curriculum design that we have and the faculty model, when all put together with, I'm not sure why that number 9 is there, with the student experience and the online mobilized learning technology, all of our programs are able to be done fully online and fully in using smartphone technology. And I always thought that it was important to have a smartphone that was an iPhone because the world is run by Apple, but Maria proved us differently earlier today. So now I need to switch to an Android and try to learn a new technology. But we have proven that it works because 87% of our students are employed in their field of study. 97% of our employers of our students are satisfied. 51% is our graduation rate. That's too low. That's not good enough. We're working to get it higher, just like everybody else is working to get it higher, and we will not be satisfied until every student that comes in will finish with exactly what she or he wanted and be able to go out into the world and be fully engaged at work and earning more. Thankfully, our graduates are earning more, but we see a future where regardless of where a student is in his progression toward knowledge attainment, they are on their path to success. Right here. You only have to switch phones if WG begins serving outside the U.S. Thanks, Maria. I appreciate that. So a little bit about me, because I know that you're all quite interested. You heard at the beginning, I am inquisitive. I'm nerdy. That's okay. I I know myself according to the Matrix theme, temet nosce, I know myself. So I am visionary. I think outside the box, which is rare for a compliance individual. Usually you're stuck in a small box and you're not able to get out, but I'm a pretty good mime and able to showcase that even though the box is there, it's not there. So we're A-okay. I am educated and credentialed, but I caution you that rectal thermometers have degrees, and guess what you do with them? So it's important to know what you're talking about, but it's also important to not think of yourself more highly than you ought. And that's a biblical quote, just in case there's anybody out there that remembers that I did graduate from Dallas Theological Seminary. I am stubborn. I'm talented, and I'd like to think that I'm talented. Unfortunately, I know that I'm talented, which is a little bit narcissistic, and I wanted to put narcissistic up there, but my N was already taken. I'm nerdy. I'm engaged and I'm determined. I'm engaged in the field. I'm engaged in trying to get the word out there that competency-based education works. I'm engaged in trying to get the word out there that education as we know it is broken, and by 2030, it's not going to be able to be sustaining if we continue to do what we do. If we continue to do what we do and expect a different result, that's crazy. If we continue to do what we do and expect the same result, we're Sisyphean. But I'd rather we all just work together and try to figure out where we're going and bring this ship behind. And as such, I'm determined. Now, here's my assumption about you all, having never met most of you before this conversation today. You're inquisitive, and you're nerdy, and you're visionary, and you're educated and credentialed. You're stubborn, you're talented, you're engaged, you're determined. So in other words, about you, we're all invested in this thing called higher education. We're basically peas in a pod. So since we're all peas in a pod, and we're going to have a lot of fun in this conversation, the context today about thinking about compliance with a future that we just don't know, let's do some math. So a lot of fun here. Higher education has a volume problem. So if you look out there, and the stats are down on the bottom right, but if you look out there, there are 2/3 of jobs require credentials, and only 42% of people in those jobs have the credential. And this is a labor force of 162.9 million people. Now, that basically means, doing the math, that there is a gap of 39.1 million people who don't have credentials. And so you look over into the adults served on the right-hand side, and you have a lot of people who are under the age of 25 who are served in higher education. Remember, WGU's average age is 36. But there's a growing number of individuals 18 to 25 who don't have the credential and are seeking it, but we still have this issue with people that are not graduating. Now go down to the bottom left. Higher ed enrollment, 20.4 million students. That's great. It's not even close to 39.1 million. And we're only putting out 3.2 million graduates per year. And by the way, this is an American higher education context, United States specific. So my apologies if you are a global thinker. This does not include global thoughts in what we do. And part of it is because we are Western Governors University, created for citizens of the Western states. Now, we have 4 million individuals retiring from work every year, and of those, about 1.2 million have had credentials. What that means is only 30% of them have had credentials, which is less than what it was. And if we're going to fill them, then if we're just going to fill those who are retiring, we're going to put out about 2 million people per year, which means it'll take 20 years to fill the gap. But I went one too far. There is a volume problem in that we also are creating new jobs because we have to create new jobs, and we create about 2.5 million new jobs a year. It was 2.3 3 years ago. It was 2.4 last year, 2.7 last year, 2.4 2 years ago. So about 2.5 million jobs a year. So again, if you do the math of 2/3 of them needing a credential, that's 1.7 million new jobs needing a credential. Now you fill the gap with those individuals who have been retiring, and we have a deficit of almost 1 million people needed to do the jobs, which means we in American higher education will never fill the gap that is needed in order to help with education in the future. We also have this issue. So on a recent panel, and this was a panel at the Education Commission of the States, a recent panel was asked this question: how do systematic state reporting systems with clear reporting and outcome measures promote program improvement in institutions? So it's kind of backward design. It's kind of trying to get to where we need to go, but frankly, it's just hamsters spinning a wheel, because when you look in these kinds of situations, we're never going to do what needs to be done based on state report cards. The academic year 18-19 has just been completed in May 2019. That data will be amalgamated here this fall. It'll be promoted to universities this winter, potentially in the spring winter of 2020. Then if you really want to make evidence-based changes, you're going to need to have trend data, not just make it based on something. So now you're going to need 3 data points, which means 3 different years, putting you out to winter of 22. Then you start the program change process, the program approval process, which in most institutions is an 18 to 24 month cycle. Yes, it can be sped up, but for the sake of this conversation, let's leave it at roughly 18 to 24 months to change the entirety of a program. And now you get into the, okay, we've got a new program ready. The regulatory environment hits, and you need to submit it to the regulatory agencies, and that's going to take another 6 months. Then you finally start your first student in the degree. That's going to be fall of 2024. It's 5 years before you finally make the change based on this past year. So fall of 2024, new degree attempter starts. And then in 4 years, tongue-in-cheek, but we're going to talk about 4 years next. In 4 years, that individual is going to graduate. So now the individual graduates spring of 2028 and is hired as a new teacher in fall of 2028. And we finally do the new assessment cycle way back in fall of 2029. So there is 10 years between what's going on now and when changes based on a report card are going to affect the next iteration of putting teachers out into our classrooms. And we wonder why there's an education problem here in the United States. So let's talk a little bit differently. Let's talk about the financing problem. And again, this is a mathematics discussion. So the biggest issue in higher education today is students claiming, I don't know math. And yet, before they tell us they don't know math, and before we say we're going to put you into a remedial math class, we put this big, long FAFSA in front of them and say, fill this out and sign here, 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 and here. Here's what your total loan is going to be, the total amount of your loan. Here's what your borrowing rate is going to be, and you should be able to pay it off in about 10 years. And they don't know math. I don't know if that's a cognitive disconnect to anybody else, but this was a conversation that I had with a panel of attorneys general this past spring, and it was the first time that they had anyone say, yeah, it's probably not a good idea to send somebody who doesn't know math to a financial aid office and walk them through what numbers mean and how much they're going to have to pay in the future. But let's talk about the fallacy of 4-year degrees. I've been in DC several times this year where everyone says 4-year degree, 4-year degree, 4-year degree. We need more students finishing 4-year degrees. We need to end a 4-year degree. We have to figure out how to make the attainment rates of 4-year degrees go up. The issue with that is 4-year degree. Fallacy of a 4-year degree. The FAFSA is created, and once students finish this process and they go through and begin a program, the average baccalaureate degree in American higher education is 120 credits. That 120 credits, if you were to take the minimum number to be a full-time student, which we all tell our students, you should take at least 12, but just get through with the 12 and we'll be happy. 120 divided by 12 is never going to equal a 4-year degree. It's always going to equal a 5-year degree, and that's if they finish everything and if the degree was only 120 credits in length. So really there is a fallacy of 4-year degrees that we are needing to face on a regular basis and trying to figure out what to do instead of what we are doing. So now we go over into some current realities. There is this term that I've learned in the past year called regulatory dark matter. As a compliance guy, I never heard of it before, and now I just can't stop thinking about it. Regulatory dark matter is what's going on a regular basis that is not in the legislative process. It's not in the regulatory process, and it's pretty much what has occurred in the California problem. And again, we'll talk about that in just a little bit here. But we have the federally negotiated rulemaking that is going on at present, and with a probability less than 10% that the negotiators would come to consensus, they came to consensus. So it's one of those things that basically means we don't know what's going to happen. We only know that the only constant that we can focus on here is change. So they came to consensus on some of these negotiated rules that now are in the process of public comment. It's going to be in 3 different phases of public comment. Right now is about the accreditation public comment, and this is where a lot of individuals with accreditation get their thoughts all intertwined. We don't know what it's going to look like as far as accreditation in the future. There's a push from the Department of Education to eliminate the phrase regional accreditation. And when speaking globally, regional accreditation sounds like it's below national accreditation. So I can see this reason to eliminate that phraseology. But the fact of the matter is, accreditation in the federal scheme has always been programmatic and institutional. There's never been national and regional accreditation. So it really is a non-issue. It's just something that we have come into the process of saying there's got to be something here. The vacated rule was the rule in California, and let's talk about this real quickly. In the last week, a federal judge decided that he would vacate the stay on implementing the 2016 state authorization rules. That's 34 CFR 600.9 subsection C, that basically said you institutions need to ensure that the states in which you have students, you have approval. So you talk about the regulatory triad, feds, states, and the accreditation agencies. The feds have basically said, you need to have the specific approval from the states. And oh, by the way, the states need to have a student complaint process that works. Well, California in the last few years has eliminated nonprofit oversight for organizations outside the state. They have beefed up for-profit oversight for organizations outside the state. And I'm not saying which one's better or worse. I'm just saying that that's a fact of the matter. That's what they've done. There is no process for individuals to obtain, to submit a complaint for a nonprofit institution if they are California residents, because the People's Republic of California has yet to join the State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement, and they did not shore up their regulatory system, even though they were told to under previous administration. They basically are left in a lurch right now. So the Department of Education said, sounds good. The guidance that we're going to give you is anybody who started a program after June, I think it's June 22nd, you cannot participate in Title IV funding for nonprofit organizations based outside of California to fund their California residents. That's affecting roughly 100,000 students, of which we are aware. It's probably higher than that, but it's affecting roughly 100,000 students. And nobody's sure where we're going to go with this. Now, the new negotiated rules have closed the loophole and basically made it a non-issue, but they won't go into effect until at the earliest July of next year. Now, the department could allow for an earlier implementation, which means that as soon as the public comment period is over, which it is, and the department posts a final rule, if that posting is done prior to November 1st, then it will go into effect in July of next year. If the effective date is given by the department as we will allow effectiveness to occur as of the date of this posting. That means the date of that posting will usurp this issue with the NEA and the lawsuit in the state of California. But right now, institutions are struggling, trying to figure out what to do. California, you can rest assured, is running around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to figure out how to not lose out on some of these talented individuals who are getting their education from places all over the country, of which WGU is one. So let's talk about reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, because it is a long time coming. And we all thought it was going to be done last year. We all hoped that we would get a draft of it this year, and hope is dwindling. But remember, hope on coming to consensus and negotiated rulemaking was at 10%. There is a possibility that reauthorization of the Higher Ed Act will come out this year. It's getting a smaller and smaller hope. I have not seen anything in a staff draft, which is the pre-circulated draft that basically goes around Washington and says, what about this, what about this? There's a lot of talk, there's just not a lot of writing, and we need a lot of writing in order to make something happen. I know that what's the senator? Senator Lamar Alexander from Tennessee. He will be retiring at the end of this year. He wants this to be his swan song. It really would not surprise me if we see something akin to a Pell Grant named after Alexander. So the Alexander Grant or something of that sort, which I realize those are two different presidential styles of names, which sound interesting, and that's not what it would be attempting to do. But nonetheless, that's what I could see coming out of this. Let's also talk about state-based control. because the 10th Amendment of the United States, which is at the bottom of the Bill of Rights here, says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Education is not in the Constitution. We have the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and education makes me happy, but not everybody. So I guess that's why education is not there, and it's left up to the states to decide. When it's left up to the states to decide, it is a states' right issue, and that's where it becomes down into the state level of what should we do, what do we want to control, and we in the United States have 56 plus or minus 3 jurisdictions that control higher education. So we are a United States, plural, not a United States singular, made up of 46 states, 4 commonwealths, 1 district, 6 territories, plus or minus, depending on how you deal with the Federated States of Micronesia and the other states within the Pacific Islands. Commonwealths within the Pacific Islands. But each one has its own prerogative on how it's going to deal with higher education, how it's going to control higher education, and California and the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas Islands are the 2 who have not joined the State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement, SARA, to allow for students to participate in federal financial aid based on home state approval from your own state's portal agency. Accreditation agencies, and I realize that I don't have much time left because I want to leave some time for questions, but nonetheless, I'm having fun, so you'll all just have to listen to me drone on a little bit longer. Accreditation agencies are gearing up for much ado about nothing. They have, the regional accreditation agencies have joined a group about 7, almost 8 years ago called the Council on Regional Accreditation Commissions, or CRAC. Do not call them crack. They don't like it. But they have joined this CRAC association and get together and talk about things such as competency-based education and what to do with organizations that are going cross borders. In the conversation with the feds potentially getting rid of regional accreditation and suggesting that there be a geographic boundary that is at least 3 states, kind of is a push at California, because the geographic boundary of the Western Association of Schools and Colleges is California and Hawaii. So it's kind of a push there, but it's an attempt to try to break up accreditation and allow institutions to basically regionally accreditation shop. But should they? Is it a good idea? Well, as long as we can maintain quality, and I love Quality Matters being on this conversation, as long as we can prove that there is quality in our education, that truly is what matters, and that's what's going to protect the accreditation agencies, whether they are a regional, a national, or a programmatic accreditation agency. And I should say as a caveat, again, these are my opinions, even though I do sit on CHIA, the Council on Higher Education Accreditation's Committee on Recognition. These are my opinions, not the opinions of the Council on Higher Education Accreditation. So again, 10th Amendment is the big issue, giving the control down to the states, and that's where you get issues like California that has got a lot of its individuals in hot water. So what? How do we comply? Well, that's the crux of this issue. What do we do when accreditation is in flux? Well, I would love to remind you of the federal misrepresentation statute that's found in 34 CFR 66871 subsection C, which talks about misrepresentation and defines it as any false, erroneous, or misleading statement an eligible institution, one of its representatives, or any ineligible institution, organization, blah, blah, blah. Let's skip down to the brass tacks. Substantial misrepresentation at the bottom is any misrepresentation on which the person to whom it was made could reasonably be expected to rely or has reasonably relied to that person's detriment. So if you say to a student, you're able to get your license when you finish my program in whatever state you want to do, you have given them a statement that they probably are substantially relying upon that you may not be able to back up, because from the time you made that statement until the time that the individual graduates and attempts to get a license, there could have been states that have changed their rules and policies and regulations, and you have now just misrepresented that individual's ability to use his or her credential out in the workforce. Again, there's an issue with the fact that it takes so dadgum long to get the program. So I'm all about trying to think outside the box and trying to figure out how to do credentialing differently, how to get individuals to be workforce ready. I can't remember what that phrase is in the in the bingo card. Top middle is the one that I'm thinking of. That's the one I want to say, so just assume that I said it and somebody mark it down, because that's going to be perfect. The compliance management challenges that everybody has are as follows. And by the way, these are the top 3 when people are asked about the top 3 business compliance challenges that they have. This is what it comes down to. And the largest challenge that they have is keeping policies up to date with new and changing regulations. Bingo, especially when, oh, by the way, that's not a bingo for the bingo card. That's a bingo for the context of our conversation here, because when regulations are consistently changing, what are you going to do about it, especially when 2 states can have completely conflicting regulations and you have to decide which one you're going to follow and have to decide how you are going to ensure that students are not harmed by you following one or the other. And then on top of those changing regulations, you have to train your employees on new policies. You have to work on records management, especially when it comes down to what do you want to say, when do you want to say it, and how are you going to say it in the context of these are the learning outcomes we have in this program, and it should lead to this specific license in this specific area. And these learning outcomes put together, or these competencies put together in this university, will equal that bachelor's degree, which is going to be recognizable wherever you go. Not true with a highly mobile population, especially a highly mobile population that is not necessarily going to remain in the United States throughout her or his lifetime. We're talking very broadly here, but thinking about online higher education, there are countries that still do not recognize online higher education, such as the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and others within the Middle Eastern control. So just because a student graduates from you does not necessarily mean that that degree will be useful to the individual if they're leaving the context, the confines of the United States. And by the way, Maria, this also is for you because I know that you love to have charts. So that's my ode to chart just for you. But what do we do instead? Well, as institutions, we can probably do a few different things. The first and foremost thing that we could do is just close shop. Let's get out, because there's not much that we can do to try to control some of these things that are going to happen. So instead of controlling them, instead of controlling variables, we're going to spin our wheels until we can't run anymore, and we'll close our school. Or we can try to figure out who else may be out there that can keep us afloat and keep us running. And this is news from today, by the way. You can potentially sign up to join another larger Big Brother institution that could save your smaller institution. Or, come on, or, there we go, breathe. You can breathe. Because we know that changes are occurring, and so does everybody else. We know that the only constant out there is change, and so does everybody else. We assume, and this is we in this small circle, me, you all, and the walls that surround us, we assume that each other is doing things right, and we know that some people don't have that same mindset. So what we have to do is document what we're doing. We have to network with one another, doing things such as we're doing right here, learning who the other players in the field are, learning who those individuals are who are overseers of the regulatory process. I'm looking at anybody who is in a State Department of Education, anybody who's in a State Department of Teaching, anybody who's in a State Department of Nursing. Those individuals turn over often, just like the executive branches of organizations. And when they turn over, there can be turmoil in what's going on, as we've seen in the changes from the John King administration to the Elizabeth DeVos administration, as we'll probably see whenever the next administration comes in. There's a lot of turnover, so networking is key, and getting the word out there as to how we are potentially harming our students is going to be key. Listen to what's going on and begin to connect some of those dots and begin to speak out whenever there are potential dots that are being connected in a negative manner, such as what's going on in California. Work hard. This is an area that we all must work hard to maintain the compliance of our universities, and I'm so thankful for an organization like Coursetune that can harmonize the curriculum in such a way that is able to showcase things that is able to bring a complex concept down to individuals that may not know how to identify complex ideologies and ideas that we all have because of academic freedom. There we go, another one for the bingo card, and the other issues that are happening with, I can't remember the other one. My card's not up, sorry. We have to be willing to negotiate. We know when we're doing things right, we know when our students are being harmed, and you have to be willing to stand up and negotiate when you know that you're on the high path, when you know that you're on top of the books rather than at the bottom of the books. But in order to negotiate, you need to have theories to prove, and you need to be able to prove your theories. And proof of your theories comes with data that you've gleaned from everything that you've done from your students. It's going to be much harder to prove a theory when you're just setting out at the beginning. That's why it's important to test and retest and begin to cycle through all of the different learning outcomes that your students have, your student learning outcomes, your programmatic learning outcomes, the assessments that you have, to make sure that you have the ability to prove your theories. But if at all possible, fail fast. As fast as possible, move on from something that does not seem to be working, because it's the failure that causes the innovations. It's the failure that proves that something's not working that allow you to make those tiny tweaks where students can be ultimately successful. But if you take long times to fail, then your cycle time for program development is increased exponentially. And that 10-year cycle for how long it takes from data to come in to a new program and a new student going out into the field will only grow. We need that to shrink in order to keep up with the speed of change in higher education and the speed of change in society today with what Maria talked about with artificial intelligence is coming in. You need to know your own personal boundaries, your own individualized personal boundaries of where you're willing to go and where you're not willing to go. And you need to be willing to say, I don't have the backbone to do this. I need somebody else to come in and be the backbone for me in these kinds of situations so that we can ultimately work together to break the glass ceilings that exist. Glass ceilings such as a 120 credit bachelor's degree that shouldn't exist, because there's no such thing as a 120 credit bachelor's degree except in some states where they've decided to regulate it. But I will let you know that there are many states that do not regulate a 120 credit bachelor's degree. There's many accreditors that don't regulate 120 credits in a bachelor's degree. And there are some great innovations that could be found if we could figure out how to give students high-level competence faster and not make them go through the low-level proof that forces them to go through a pipeline to get to the higher-level competence. So that's what we're doing. We're breathing. Michael, I'm trying not to preach as much as possible, but nonetheless, it's a heck of a lot of fun. So now we're going to get into some questions. And one of the things that I love is this quote from Jeff Bezos where he said, you have to be willing to be misunderstood if you're going to innovate. We are willing to be misunderstood in my organization. In my department, we are willing to be misunderstood, but we are not willing to be misinterpreted or misconstrued. So everything we say, we know can and will be used against us, and we do everything we can to support what we have to say through data and to allow those changes to be made based on data-driven decision making. So I would love to see a preaching snail, Maria. Turn it over if